Welcome to MSL Talk with Tom Caravela, a podcast specifically designed for MSLs and all things field medical. Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. My guest today is Paul Ward. He is head of field medical at Beijing, and we talk about the pros and cons of skip level meetings. Awesome information. I know you guys are going to like this. Don't forget to follow me on LinkedIn and check out all the announcements of stuff that's coming up. Check us out on YouTube. Just type in MSL Talk, and then join us for our live conversations, which are on the MSL Talk live platform, and that is on LinkedIn Live, typically the first Tuesday of every month at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Hey, Paul, welcome back to the show, my friend. How are you?
I'm really good, Tom. Appreciate you having me back.
Yeah, man, I was excited. And hey, guys, for those of you that don't know, Paul was one of my first guests when I first launched the podcast. As a matter of fact, he just reminded me it was episode number 8, and it was about COVID. And I'll tell you, if you haven't listened to that one, go back and listen to it, because I think there's a lot of stuff that we got right, and then there's a lot of stuff that maybe not so much. Paul, what do you think?
Yeah, it was such an honor to be one of your first guests, by the way. But yeah, we knew we had to give some guidance. I remember being with my team having to figure out what we were going to do, and like most leaders and yourself, like we got a lot of it wrong. I don't think any of us would have predicted it would last this long.
Yeah.
But then it was May of 2020 when we did that podcast. Yeah. We were still trying to figure, pivot to digital. Are we going virtual? How can we help our HCPs that are doing ICU duty as well as their normal job, and just all the chaos that ensued. So it is kind of fun to go back and listen to that. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, welcome back, my friend. Why don't you do a quick intro, just so that if anyone doesn't know who you are, which they should, because you're the man. So just do a quick intro, and then we'll get into it.
Happy to do it, Tom. Well, my name is Paul Ward. I am the executive director of field medical at Beijing. Just been there for about 5 months. So still learning the company, but so far really pleased with the team and the leadership and the vision of the company. So happy about that. I've been in pharma since 1988. Tom, you were born in 1988, weren't you?
Just right around there. It was a little before that.
So yeah, I've been doing this a while. Been in commercial roles. Been in the MSL role. Been in the regional director role, and a variety of national director roles too. So. Just love medical affairs. And really, before we get on the podcast, I got to thank you. I wish when I was a younger medical affairs professional in MSL, we had resources like the ones that you're creating here on MSL Talk. It's so good. And the fact that you're up to, 117 or so, right?
Yeah. I
just listened to your talk the other day on core values. I thought that was spectacular, and that was, it's good to have Tom Caravela hosting Tom Caravela sometimes. That was really, really special for me. Nice work.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that, and I appreciate all the support that we've been getting. And I'll tell you, the show has, I think the reason it's become so popular is because of guests like you, Paul. And I'm not just saying that. I'm serious that we've been fortunate enough to have some of the top leaders and most brilliant minds in pharma and biotech, specifically in medical affairs, that have just shared tremendous wisdom with us. So I'm a fan of this podcast, and I enjoy it, and I am committed to keeping it going. So thank you all. Yeah,
please do. Flattered to be considered one of your guests. But believe me, I've probably listened to 2/3 of your podcast in the car, like most MSLs traveling, on the treadmill, all kinds of places. I learned so much, so it's not unnoticed or unappreciated by me at this stage in my career as well.
Good stuff, man. Well, we're going to get into it. We have a good topic to talk about, but before we do that, This episode is sponsored by Momentum Events, and there's a conference coming up that I want to encourage you guys to check out. It's their Medical Affairs Excellence Summit, and it's on October 13th and 14th. It is live, and that's in Philadelphia. So for more details, go and check them out online. Go to Momentum Events and look for the Medical Affairs Excellence Summit. Use code TOM20. So there's no space, it's just TOM20, and get 20% on your registration. The early bird registration actually expires on August 26th. So you definitely want to take action. And they're doing a virtual event in September on September 14th to 15th. So check that out as well. But Momentum does a great job. You would definitely want to check these guys out. So Paul, you had come up with this idea of talking about split level meetings, which is a term that I think a lot of people probably aren't familiar with, but should be. So let's just start with the basics. Can you describe or tell everybody what that term split level meetings actually means?
Sure. And, different companies call it different things: split level, skip level, one-on-ones with executives, any number of things. But the premise is just the same. And in fact, as we were talking, if your company doesn't do skip level meetings, I think some of the content we're going to speak of here also just applies to, what do you do when you're at a conference and you end up on the in the elevator with your CEO, your vice president, and you've got to come up with some really interesting stuff really quickly, right? So I think it applies to a broad range of audience. But by and large, what a skip level is basically is you're having one-on-ones. Usually they're one-on-ones with someone that is one level above your manager. So in my case, I'm a national director. I have regional directors, and then I have MSLs. This would be me speaking to my MSL team directly, which, by the way, Tom, is one of my favorite parts of my job and the best parts of my day. But that's in essence what a skip level is. It's basically skipping that one level in the hierarchy of the org chart and getting information back and forth from two-level manager to in this case to the MSL.
Yeah. It's just to show you how little I know about this. I said split level and it's skip level. So we're going to start with that. Anyway, so all right. So who initiates this? So I understand the concept, and I can even start to think about the benefits, but how does this get initiated?
That's a great question. And I think, honestly, thinking about this, I always appreciate initiative, right? So I think generally speaking, this is an exercise that is initiated by the second level manager, right? To say, I want to get to know my team. As an example, me just joining Beijing, I needed to get to know my team. And so skip levels and get to know you meetings are good. One rule is, we shouldn't just do these one and done. They should be done on a regular cadence, at least 2 or 3 times a year. Okay. We'll come back to that later in the podcast. So that's generally speaking, but I think anyone for MSLs that want to request something like this, now I think your skip level manager would be extremely happy to take a call like that. We'll talk about transparency and looping in your manager on what's happening, but I think it's bi-directional. It can be initiated by either party.
Mm-hmm. What would you say? Now, I would imagine that you had already mentioned that it's a great way to get to know your team, but are there specific goals that you already have in mind prior to going into these meetings? You had mentioned having them regularly. So this is obviously something that you incorporate into your strategy. So talk to me about the goals that you have set out for these.
Yeah, great question. I think, honestly, the first thing is just to build some relationships. Hybrid working and COVID, going back to our podcast of a couple of years ago, really changed the frequency with which we get to see each other. So I look at these skip levels as even more important now that we're not either in the office or, even with your sponsor having live meetings and live congresses, and going back to that meeting in Philadelphia. I hope people go. It's just such a great way to see people, but we've been robbed of that the last couple of years. It's just, I think, that much important to have some connection points. So building relationships, you gain insight into the team dynamics too, like what's working and what's not working, and the culture of the team. You also can test a bit, how is communication going? Like if you're talking about something that's focused for your team, and they're like, well, I didn't even know we were supposed to be doing that. Well, that tells you something. We can debate what it tells you, depending upon any number of factors, but you've learned something about how information, the efficiency with which it's flowing back and forth, how are people remembering things. And then, I think too, it's living the values of your organization. I mean, we really should be listening to everybody. Back to your core values, one of mine is wisdom and empathy. And you gain both of these from skip level meetings. You get a lot wiser, and you want to hear people's point of view, and whether they are introverts or extroverts, I think everybody at some level appreciates their voice being heard. And I think it's certainly better than a lot of the engagement surveys or poll surveys that companies do that ask very confusing questions sometimes, and kind of artificial environment with which you're answering that. These are good for all that. And I think really, honestly, listen and learn. I mean, I think at the base level, that's really what you're getting out of this.
Yeah, I think you can gain so much understanding of, what's working, what's going well. Get an understanding, like you said, is, what's the culture looking like, and are people fulfilled in their role? Is everyone aligned with core values? I mean, I'll tell you, one of the reasons I did that podcast about core values is I think it gets swept under the rug a bit. I think it becomes a slogan on the conference room wall, right? It's like a bumper sticker. But in reality, if as individuals and as organizations, if we stick to our core values and make sure that everybody's aligned with core values, then it preserves the culture. It creates a culture.
Yeah, you got it. And even just listening to your podcast, I know what your values are. Your faith and your family and your fitness. Your three North Stars. That's a great exercise. I hadn't thought about it until I listened to your podcast. But what a great way to have the leader discuss their core values, and maybe as an assignment before the skip level to have the MSL do the same thing, so you can talk about that, and then where those align or misalign. To your point, you don't want to fake your core values. That's horrible. If there's something there that's missing, let's talk about that, and just to get to know people in general, right? I mean, I don't want to over-index on the values, because there's a lot of day-to-day stuff too. But there's all kinds of ways you can do this, I think, rightly and wrongly.
Yeah. Let's go back to the MSL for a second. So, you had talked about having this as a regular practice. You set up these meetings and you have one-on-ones with MSLs. Obviously, they're managers, so the middle manager is fully aware of, this practice. But let's just say the MSL wants to meet with you, and for whatever reason it might be. How do they initiate that? Do they go to their manager first and request that they do that, or do they come right to you? What's your suggestion?
Yeah, I think it depends upon the nature of the meeting, right? Okay. So in some cases, I think in extreme cases, the MSL may want to talk to you about something that the manager's doing that they just want to bounce off you, and I would take that meeting and listen and learn, and then filter out what I know to be true to know what I think to be true. But it's an additional point. And I think this is within a skip level. It's always important for the MSL and for the leader to discuss, what's confidential about this conversation, if there is such a thing. If there's something that you're telling me in confidence, you have to establish that up front. I do think anything that I hear from an MSL, I would hope that they have made their manager aware, unless it's, as I said, something sensitive about that relationship or management style. And B, if the manager were in the room, they wouldn't be surprised by what they're hearing, because that's their manager, right? I mean, and I don't want to, and we'll talk about pitfalls of these meetings. The last thing I want to do is bypass the regional director or the first line manager, because that's a tough job, Tom. You manage people too. I mean, the last thing you need is second guessing Monday morning quarterback, We'll talk more about those pitfalls in a minute. So I think it depends upon the nature of the meeting, and the companies are different. I tell my MSLs and field medical directors, hey, text me during the day. If you've got something that's good or bad happening to you, I'd love to know about it. And that's the open culture that I want to create. Other companies can be a little bit more hierarchical. And you have to know that culture before you enter into some of these types of meetings.
Yeah. Well, before we get to the pitfalls, because obviously that's something I think we really need to talk about, but I know that there's a lot of benefits that come from this. I'm sure there's probably a lot of leaders that may not have been using these skip level meetings as regularly as they should. What's your advice to some of those leaders? And what would you say are the benefits that you've gotten out of it?
Yeah, I think for me, it's just number one, it's the relationship component that you build. I mean, people really do want to know that people at higher levels in the organization know them, care about them, have their best interest in mind. That's that's base level to the conversation. I think diversifying your perspective too is good, because it's very easy to sit in a headquarters or a home office, wherever you are, but not in the field, not on every team call, not out there pounding the pavement, and get kind of, you can assume it. Like I told you, I've been doing this since '88. There's a lot of things that I knew to be true 10, 15, 20 more years ago that aren't so anymore. They're just not. And it's a whole new ballgame. So it keeps me current. It keeps me fresh on what the pain points are, because my biggest job as a manager is to support my team, remove barriers, and listen, right? So I do that much better when I'm talking to the team. And so diversifying that perspective and gathering the feedback, all of that is good. We talked a little bit about, communication efficiency, what's working, what's not working. And these are all just direct questions you can ask, like, how am I doing? And, we have too many meetings, not enough meetings. Is there something else that we should be doing? And then you can also just do some diagnoses of strengths of the team and weaknesses of the team, or their training issues that come up, hard skills, soft skills, all of that. So I think those are really, really important things to keep in mind when you're doing this. And that's what I get out of it.
Yeah, no, that's good stuff. And I like the idea. This wasn't my question, but I was going to get to it, but I like the idea of asking those open-ended questions, right? So do you go into this and you're like, hey, let's talk. What's top of mind for you? Or do you have very targeted questions?
I think depending upon where you are in the year, it can be either one. Like, for get to know you stuff, where I'm at with my new company, lots of open-ended questions, right? Like, how we do it? What's the culture here? Why did you join the company? Tell me a little bit about your background, those kind of questions. I think ideally it's a blending of the open and, hey, let me ask you about this, how did we do, and how clear are our messages and our scientific narrative and our insights? Is it making sense? What keeps you up at night as an MSL? Everybody wants to complain about their CRM and administrative work, and in some cases there are things we can do to make that streamlined and easier. So it's a blending of the two, I think, Tom. But just like it's sort of like the life cycle of the relationship, it's going to ebb and flow a bit. And then there may be different times within the company where the company's a big picture going through different struggles or strengths. And it's important to touch base on some of those things too, if you have opportunity to get that view from the street.
Yeah. Yeah. Getting back to the MSL side of it. So is there anything that the MSL can do to prepare for these meetings, would you say?
Yeah, for sure. Ideally, you should know a little bit about the person you're meeting with. And that sounds so basic, and it should be such a normal thing for the MSL to do, because that's what they do on their external interactions, right? I mean, you would expect them before they go visit a physician or healthcare provider that they do their homework. They look at their publications, they look at where they train, they look at their research interest. The same thing applies. In fact, I think the rule of thumb, Tom, would be, MSL should really look at some of their internal stakeholders, much like they do their external KOLs. Like know them, spend some time on LinkedIn, those basic rules of engagement apply internally as much as externally. That'll help a bunch. So yeah, I definitely prepare. And again, it can be really formal or informal. Some MSLs even send me a list of questions beforehand or an agenda beforehand, and that's cool. Some people like that. I think you and I kind of like to know what we're in for too, so we can prepare on the other end. Just different strokes for different folks, as they say.
Yeah. And what about advice? Is there any advice you could give to MSLs as they go into this? Preparation's one thing, but the other thing is, are there pitfalls for the MSL? Is it possible that they could kind of mess this up? Is it possible they can overshare? Can they be too direct? Can they be too like? I think there's people out there that are like, they want to have the answers to the test here.
Yep, you got it. Well, certainly this could be a really big feather in your cap as an MSL. Or, like your interaction with the KOL, the floor can drop out at any moment, right? Depending upon any number of things. So I would say, a couple of things come to mind, like don't wing it. I mean, don't just think this is a conversation. It is, but it isn't. But, like anytime you're getting to know someone, there's opinions being formed. There's information that's being gathered. One of the things too that I like to tell people is don't forget to say what's working well. That's important too. We always, and I'm guilty of this too, Tom, you kind of focus on what's not working, but if there's something that's going well, people want to hear that. I think the other thing, and this is probably the biggest nugget from this side of the conversation, which is if you're going to bring up an issue, be ready for me to ask you about proposed solutions. All right. Hey, Tom, you're bringing this up. You've thought about this for longer than I have. Give me some idea what you think a possible solution to this issue might be, because you're experiencing it firsthand. I think that's that second part of it. People are really good at raising things. Sometimes they forget, or and particularly when you're talking to senior executives, they go into solution mode pretty quickly, and they're going to want to know what your thoughts are on this. So have thought about that a little bit if you're going to bring something up.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I think a lot of people go in and they get caught up in the emotion of this moment, and need to realize that in the same way that you have to exercise self-awareness and control your emotions when you're speaking to a KOL, you have to do that internally as well, and be careful, but also be prepared and be someone that's going to actually provide support internally and be able to, whatever it is, again, we're talking hypotheticals here, but you need to be prepared. You need to add value to that conversation the same way you would add value to an external conversation.
Exactly right. You're exactly right, Tom. And I do think that it's just human nature. People are looking at you thinking, wow, is this person ready for the next level in their career? Do I see them 2 levels above their current position? I mean, all of these things are what people are sort of, wow, man, this Tom guy's pretty sharp, or man, he's really kind of stuck in a silo. I think Tom needs to ruminate a little bit in the role a little bit longer and learn, gain some experience. That's all. That's going through people's mind too, as to how they perceive you. So, the word of advice there is think about how you want to be perceived, and then act accordingly, right?
It's almost like an interview. It is
Really?
an interview. It's basically an ongoing interview, because every interaction that you have with leaders within your organization is a chance for you to step up and to impress, make an impression, show your value, show your worth. You can have the leader could leave that meeting and say, wow, I'm blown away by this person. Every time I speak to him, it gets better and better, or not. Or maybe they say, I had an opportunity, this person had an opportunity to spend an hour with me, and I'm leaving kind of thinking that, not so much. Do you agree with that?
I really do. It really is. It's like, you can look at it as interviewing for the job that you already have, or interviewing 6 months, 6 weeks, a year before the next job that you want. I mean, it really is. It's it's just a way to leave an impression and think about how you want to be perceived. I think that's a really brilliant way you thought of it, Tom.
Yeah. Yeah. There's probably a lot of MSLs out there. They're all nervous right now. They're like, oh, wait, I never thought of it that way.
Maybe, you're probably right.
Yeah. So let's talk about the pitfalls. Obviously, there's some real good positives that could come of this. We talked about goals and some of the benefits of doing this. So what can be the negatives? What could be some of the pitfalls that might come of these?
Yeah, I think, there are pitfalls. These are sensitive things for a lot of people. Like you say, the MSL is maybe sweating it a little bit. The manager, the second level manager might be sweating it a little bit, but the middle manager too, like the regional director in this case, it's kind of a stressful time for them too. So I think, one of the pitfalls is, be open and be transparent with everybody that you're doing it. Have a conversation with the manager, because you're crossing some lines of communication, right? You need to do that. And you do, as I mentioned before, set the ground rules. Like, as soon as you meet with someone, particularly if hopefully you make them feel comfortable and part of a team, you don't want to be skipping out the regional director on emails and lines of communication. That's just bad form. Nobody wants that. And so you do have to talk about how you want to communicate and sort of reestablish those lines, however you want them to be at the onset with everybody. Everybody should know this, right? So hopefully the middle manager is not threatened. I think there's ways of softening that, particularly with transparency, but it's just human nature, right? Wonder what's going on behind closed doors, right?
Yeah.
And then, I think another pitfall is a manager going into this kind of a conversation and not being aware of performance issues or thorny issues, or even a little bit of the future and the past and the present of that MSL. I got to do my homework if I'm doing these too, right? I got to know what companies the MSLs work for and how their performance has been. So in a lot of cases, that's a conversation with the regional director beforehand, particularly if you see people at the high end of the spectrum or even low performers. Like, get the goods, because those are the ones that are going to be potentially the most either beneficial or the most worrisome to people on that end of the performance spectrum. So yeah, you got to know that. You got to know. You got to do your homework. And I said before, like, another pitfall is don't do these one and done. If you can do them. My previous job, I had 80 MSLs. I had a big team. I could have done just skip level meetings for Monday through Friday. It fills up your schedule. I look for some other ways to engage that team, but I did skip levels as well a lot. In fact, probably more than I even remember, because I like it. Right? You kind of gravitate towards doing things that you like anyway. But it's just like an MSL meeting with a key opinion leader. If they're not meeting with them 2 or 3 times a year, it's really more of a transactional thing and not a relationship builder. So I would say minimum twice a year do these things. Don't one and done. And so those are the formal ones that you're putting on Outlook. And then, of course, like I saw you at the American Society of Clinical Oncology, when you see people at congresses, you have informal check-ins, like, on the bus and in the elevator and over coffee and after the pre-con and all of those things. There's lots of opportunities. Yeah.
Well, and every chance you get a lot of chances to continue to make an impression, even if it's informal. It's in this career, you're constantly being judged. So take advantage of every opportunity that you get. Getting back to the meetings, and again, there's a lot of leaders that are listening to this. There's a lot of people that might want to know a little bit more about logistics. So just a couple of other questions. So you mentioned having a big team. Have you ever done this in groups instead of individual one-on-one meetings?
Yeah, I did. And I'll tell you, I had a MSL council, which was one member of each of the 8 teams that I had. And they were, think of them like a senator. Like they had a constituency, which is their team. So what led to that, and this is something, if you do have a big team, you can do, I think, pretty effectively, is, like we had surveys, and I would just drill down with my team on, all right, what do we had low scores here. Let's dig into those and really help me understand why those scores are low. And they would ask their team for additional color on some of those questions and bring that to the meeting. This is back when we were doing, I think the last time I did it, we had a couple virtual meetings a year and then a couple live meetings where we'd get together. And we read some books on team health, and I'm doing that at Beijing as we speak. Actually, Friday's the due date for nominations for the council for my field medical team. Those are good ways. If you can't do skip levels with everybody, at least let people know that they've got that opportunity and they're speaking through now, not just their manager, but you're getting, and this is a key point, Tom, you need as a leader, you need unfiltered information to get into your ears. And if you're only relying on your direct line managers to do that, you can, they're really good. And more often than not, what you're hearing is exactly what you need to hear. But again, that perspective from the MSL is like gold to me. I mean, you really want to hear that unfiltered, not with some spin or a little bit of bias that's put on it by the first line manager. You get it right from the source. And that has to be a ground rule up front is, this is what we're doing. We're not doing this to complain about everything, and we're not doing here to say everything is peachy. You really have to say, we need to have the honest conversation. Let's take back to your team what they want to know and tell me, please, the things that I'm asking for, unfiltered, straight from the heart.
Yeah. What you're feeling. So when you have these, and again, helping the leaders that are listening, you have these meetings. And I know from my own situation, when I have these meetings internally, sometimes they turn into coaching sessions. Do you find that that's the case? And do you try to avoid that and just make it more informational? Or do you actually use it as an opportunity to help coach?
I think there's an opportunity for both. I'll give you an example. I had a skip level meeting yesterday. And it was with a very seasoned field medical employee. And we were just, I asked an open-ended question about, hey, where do you see yourself? I mean, you're really good at what you do. Is you want to continue on this path, or what do you want to do? So there's your open-ended question. Tell me a little bit about how you see your future. And he had cited, maybe I would like to be a leader of a team at some point in time. All right, so that's open-ended. I'm not coaching yet, right? Here's what I did take the opportunity to do. I said, one of my interview questions is always, tell me what you've done to prepare for this interview, right? So when I asked this first, I'm like, what are you doing on your individual development plan to take steps towards becoming a regional director, if that's what you want to do? Because that's what I'm going to ask you in the interview. And if you don't have something specific to say, then it looks like you just threw your hat in the ring after being on the team for 10 years because someone's got to do it. And that's cool. But boy, when someone says, I took this course, I prepared through HR with this, I was in a field leadership opportunity, did any number of things that one can do to prepare. Now you're separating yourself from the herd. So now you get it. Like now I'm coaching to say, next time we talk, I want to hear about what you're doing. If this is an interest of yours, to do that. And I will say that was a really good moment, a special moment, because you say, hey, Paul, that's really, really helpful. Thank you for that. So there's an example where it's not like hardcore coaching on presentation skills or something like that, but just wisdom and advice from someone that's going to be looking at you as a prospective direct report, maybe in a couple of years or, like 6 weeks, 6 months, you just never know. There's a coaching op. I took the opportunity to do it. Yeah.
Well, you're an amazing leader. It just comes naturally for you.
Yeah, you're too kind.
I'm being serious. And to that point, you have experience doing these, and you've been successful doing these. So last question, and I want to hear from both sides as it relates to the MSL and as it relates to the leader. What stands out in your mind as something that has been really impressive to you? So you have these split level meetings, you meet with MSLs. what would you say, or what advice would you give to those MSLs to say, hey, I'm going to just give you just my personal opinion from doing all of these. Here's what resonates with me the most. What would it be?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. For the MSL, do they know what they're supposed to know? Like, do they know what their objectives are? Do they know? And these aren't data. Like, I've had MSLs present to me before, but I don't do those in skip levels. I mean, that may be a follow-up from a skip level if I get an idea that might be a step that needs to be taken, or have the RM do it or the RD do it, right? But I really do want to see, and it's back to your brilliant point about the interview. Like, when I interview people, particularly with like the behavioral interview stuff, like, we all know what question. Tell me about a time, right? Everybody knows the questions that you're going to be asked. What really wins me over in the interview and in the skip level is the quality of the question that the MSL is asking me. Like, wow, that's somebody that knows, that understands. It sort of incorporates a little bit about the company, about the team, about where we're going. And then the second piece to that, Tom, is, who's bringing some solutions to the table, as I mentioned before, right? Like, it's great to have an observation, but your next level, is, hey, you've thought about it. What's your proposed solution to it? Those are the two things that really, like you say, when you walk away from this, it's thumbs up instead of thumbs sideways or thumbs down on that interaction.
I love it. I love it. And then last question. So when you have, so there's leaders that are going to start doing these meetings. Last piece of advice that you have for them to say, hey, go into these meetings and do this. This is just one piece of advice. Don't forget this.
I think two things. One is, I mentioned it earlier, like, listen, really, active listening. Don't be, doing your flight to New York at the same time you're doing a skip level. Really, really dig, lean in and make this what it should be, which is that person and your opportunity. Because I'm going to tell you, I get probably as much or more out of these things than the MSL does. And I approach it like that. Like, this is an opportunity for me. And of course, all those things I said about the MSL making an impression, I want to do the same thing as a leader. Like, hey, you're in good hands, right? The captain of the ship. We got this together, but I need you, right? So you needed those things. I think one other thing that I would advise people is be pretty consistent, because MSLs talk, right? I mean, if I'm talking to you, Tom, about your career development, and we're talking for 30 minutes and 25 of it is about this, and I'm not giving someone else 2 days later that same sort of consistent, tell me about your development. All right, now Tom's wondering why Paul brought this up to Sally, but not to Tom, right? So they don't have to be cookie cutter, but be consistent in your approach and really get into those things that you really want answers to. So, and that means preparing, right? It takes time.
Yeah. Yeah. Paul, you're the man. This was awesome. I just love having you on. Love talking to you. I always learn incredible amounts of information, and I'm sure that everybody appreciates everything that you do for this industry. And you're awesome, man. I can't believe it's been this long. We have to definitely do this again sooner and not wait so long.
Yeah, you got it. That's good. It's always good to see you. And hey, right back at you. You keep up the great service work that you're doing for the MSL profession. I'm a big fan of yours, Tom, and I do listen to those podcasts, man. I do, and I learn a lot. So thanks to all the leaders and MSLs that are, with you, and for everybody that's out there, if you've got an idea, don't be afraid to raise it to Tom.
Yeah, man.
That's the truth. And you listen, and I think the 2 times I raised my hand to say I got something hot, let's do it, man. Like a week later, we're on the podcast.
It was a week ago, literally, like a week ago, and I do listen, and I'll tell you, I appreciate people reaching out to me with ideas, whether you want to come on or whether you just have an idea. Just let me know what it is, because we need to, as a community, we need to stick together and share best practices, share ideas. And if there's stuff out there that you're curious about, just let me know what it is, and I'll find somebody like Paul that can come out and share their wisdom. And if you like this, guys, share it. Don't forget to check out Momentum Events, that conference coming up there's 2 of them. One is virtual, in September on the 14th and 15th, and then the other one, or 13th and 14th, and then the other one is live in Philly on the 14th and 15th. So check those out. Use the code TOM20 to get your discount. Paul, hope all is going to go well for you for the rest of the year. I wish you the best, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for listening to the show. If you've enjoyed it, please subscribe so that you don't miss episodes in the future, and feel free to leave a rating or a review or a comment. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.